Hello, this is Mrs. Ward, and I'm going to go over the additional summer review practice sheet. So here are the formulas: the a cubed minus b cubed, a cubed plus b cubed, and the quadratic formula. Remember, none of those will be provided for you on the test. So the first one, it says factor completely, and on the test you have to follow the directions. You have to factor it or solve the way we say I want you to solve it. So number one, they want you to factor completely. So what I'm going to do, the first thing I'm always going to do is I'm going to factor out the greatest common factor. In this case, it's going to be x squared, but since my lead coefficient is negative, I'm going to go ahead and factor out a negative x squared and make this a positive 125x cubed minus, I factored out a negative, so this will be a minus 8. And then since it's a binomial, in other words, it only has two terms, there's only three ways that I could possibly factor it. One would be the difference of two perfect squares, difference of two perfect cubes, or the sum of two perfect cubes. This is a difference because of this minus sign, and I'm going to check to see if these are two perfect cubes. And I can rewrite 125 as a 5x to the third minus 2 to the third, which means this is my A and this is my B. And now I'm going to go ahead and factor it using this formula here. Remember, this formula takes care of that minus sign, so that B is just 2. So when I factor this, this will end up being 5x minus 2 times 5x squared minus 5x times 2. Actually, this is a plus. And then plus 2 squared. And when I simplify it, I'm going to end up with 5x minus 2 times 25x squared plus 10x plus 4. And that is it factored completely. Now I'm going to, oh, whoa, almost forgot. My bad. I forgot to bring down this negative x squared, and then this would be my final answer. Please do not forget what your greatest common factor is part of your answer. Okay, moving on to number 2, factor completely. Again, it is... I'm going to factor out the greatest common factor. So what I see here is that I have a 4 in common, and I also have the n. So I'm going to factor out the 4n. I'm going to be left with 27m to the 6th minus n to the 6th. So I'm going to think of that as 3m cubed minus n squared cubed. Remember, when you raise a power to a power, you multiply the exponents. So following that formula, I'm going to have 4n times, and then I'm going to do my a, which is 3m minus n squared. Then I'm going to do 3m squared, changing the sign to a plus sign, 3m times n squared plus n squared squared. And when I simplify that, I'm going to have 4n times 3m minus n squared. Then this will be 9m squared plus 3mn plus n to the 4th. And that is my final answer. Please don't forget that 4n. Factor completely. So I see that they have a common factor of a and 4. So I'm going to factor out 4a. So this will be 8b to the 9th. Plus a to the 3rd. So when I think of this, I'm going to think of this as 4a times 2b cubed to the 3rd plus a to the 3rd, if I want to write it like that. So I'm going to have 4a, then I'm going to have 2b cubed plus a times 2b cubed squared, changing the sign, that would be minus 2b cubed a plus a squared. And when I FOIL and raise everything to the powers, this will be 4b to the 4th minus 2b cubed a plus a squared. And that is my final answer. Okay, moving on to the next one. It says solve each of the equations using the quadratic formula. So in order to use the quadratic formula, I have to set it equal to 0. So I'm going to rewrite this as 9x squared minus 12x minus 3 is equal to 0. This is my A, this is my B, and this is my C. So I guess I should be clear and say my A is 9, my B is negative 12, and my C is a negative 3. So the quadratic formula says I do the opposite Oh, you know what? Looking at this, guess what? I can factor out, I could use those and still get the same answer, but I'm going to make life a little bit easier on myself, and I'm going to factor out a 3. So I'm going to factor out a 3 and make this 3 times 3x squared minus 4x minus 1 is equal to 0. Now, if I would have not factored out the 3, I still would have gotten the same answer. It's fine, but now I'm going to work with smaller numbers. So A is going to be 3, B is going to be negative 4, C is going to be negative 1. So I'm going to do the opposite of B, so positive 4, plus or minus the square root of B squared minus 4AC all over 2a. So I'm going to have 4 plus or minus the square root, and then negative 4 squared is 16. That'll end up being plus 12 all over 6. So this will be 4 plus or minus the square root of 28 all over 6. I'm going to think of 28 as the square root of 4 times the square root of 7. So I'm going to get that 4 plus or minus 2 times the square root of 7 all over 6. So I'm going to think of this as 4, 6 plus or minus 2 times the square root of 7 over 6. So I can simplify with my denominator. So I end up with 2/3 plus or minus the square root of 7 over 3. And I'm just going to leave my answer like that. Okay, moving on to the next one. Solve the equation by completing the square. So to complete the square, I'm going to first start by making this 4x squared plus 8x plus 100 is equal to 0. And then I see that I have a common factor of 4, so I'm going to divide everything by 4. And when I divide everything by 4, 0 divided by 4 is still 0, but this will be x squared plus 2x plus 50. To complete this square, I'm dividing by 4, Mrs. Ward, so that would be 25. So I'm going to complete the square, so I'm going to get that 25 out of the way. So that'll be negative 25. Then I'm going to ask myself, I'm looking at this middle term, and I'm saying half of 2. So 2 divided by 2 would be 1. 1 squared would be 1. So I'm going to have x squared plus 2x plus 1. So I just added this 1 to this side to make that doable, which means I'm going to have to add 1 to this side, and this will be negative 24. Since I have that plus 1, I can rewrite this as the quantity of x plus 1 squared is equal to negative 24. So I'm completing by taking the square. Now I'm going to take the square root. So I'm going to have x plus 1 is equal to plus or minus the square root of negative 24. So I'm going to leave this as x plus 1 is equal to plus or minus. Because of this negative sign, I'm going to have this I, square root of 24. I'm going to think of 24 as 4 times 6. So this will be x plus 1 is equal to plus or minus 2i actually, square root of 6. Now I'm going to bring the 1 over to the other side. So x is equal to negative 1 plus or minus 2i times the square root of 6. And that is my final answer. Number 6, solve the equation by taking the square roots, which means I can only do this if I do not have a linear term. In other words, I do not have a term that just has an x. So I'm going to write 2x squared, add this 6 to the other side, so that's going to equal negative 19. Divide both sides by 2, because before I can take the square root, I have to have this variable on one side by itself, and this will be 19 over 2. Now I'm going to take the square root of this side, square root of this side. And when I take the square root, this will be the square root of negative 19 over the square root of 2. So when I do that, I'm going to have x is equal to plus or minus the square root of negative 19 over the square root of negative 2. Okay, I don't know why I made this negative 2. It's just positive 2 because I put the negative sign up with the 19. So when I do this, I'm going to have x is equal to plus or minus I times the square root of 19 over the square root of 2. Now I need to rationalize my denominator, so I'm going to multiply by the square root of 2 over the square root of 2. And when I do that, I get x is equal to plus or minus I times the square root of 38 all over 2. and I'm going to leave it like that. That's my final answer. Remember, I cannot simplify these two, even though they're both even, because one's under the radical sign and the other one is not. And then the last part of this is just make sure you know your calculator skills, and make sure you go over that analyzing graphing worksheet so that you're able to find the horizontal asymptotes. Let's start it again. You need to find the vertical asymptotes, the holes, the horizontal asymptotes, the slant asymptotes, and the x and the y intercepts. All right, we'll see you next time. Hope this helps.